She was a four-star general on a classified mission. But when two small-town officers saw her, they didn't see a leader. They saw a threat. One disrespectful stop. One humiliating arrest. And then one phone call to the Pentagon. What happened next destroyed careers, triggered national outrage, and exposed the dangerous cost of assumption. This story will shake you. Stay to the end, because justice didn't just knock, it kicked the door down. It was supposed to be just another silent, uneventful drive across rural Louisiana, the kind of back road where the trees lean in over the asphalt, like they're whispering secrets, and the towns pass so quickly you forget their names before you've even cleared their limits. General Naomi Ellsworth knew this route by heart. She'd taken it a dozen times on classified missions. No sirens, no military convoy, just a rental car, a secure phone, and her own thoughts. On that day, dressed in jeans, a plain green jacket, scuffed sneakers, and a baseball cap, hiding the grey starting to form at her temples, Naomi didn't look like one of the highest-ranking military officers in the country. She looked like any other woman trying to make it through a hot southern afternoon, but inside the SUV sat a black briefcase that, if opened, could trigger international alarms. Her mission was to report directly to Barksdale Air Force Base to brief top brass on sensitive overseas deployments. She was 30 minutes ahead of schedule when her Pentagon-issued secure line began to flicker. No bars. Naomi needed to re-establish the connection immediately, not just for protocol, but because what she was about to say over the phone couldn't wait. That's when she spotted the dusty gas station off Route 32, Kelly's Fuel and Food. Faded sign, two busted pumps, a rusting ice machine, and a few locals leaning against dented pickups. It didn't look like much, but it would have to do. Naomi pulled into the cracked lot and parked near the side of the building where it was quiet. She stepped out, raised her phone, and initiated the briefing. General Ellsworth verifying identity, initiating secure transmission, she said, keeping her tone flat. She paced slowly along the edge of the lot, speaking in code, feeding real-time updates to the Pentagon. Across the lot, some of the men at the gas station squinted at her, watching, whispering, trying to figure out who she was. She kept her eyes moving, alert but composed, trained over decades of service to always anticipate risk. What Naomi didn't know was that behind the counter inside, a woman named Paula Sweeney was watching her too, but not with curiosity, with suspicion. Paula, the station manager, had lived in Mosswood her entire life and judged outsiders with a narrowed eye. To her, Naomi looked like trouble, black, quiet, and holding a device she didn't recognize. Not that it mattered. Paula didn't need a reason. She picked up the landline behind the counter and called the police. "Yeah, this is Kelly's," she said in a low voice. "We got a woman out back, acting weird, might be on something. Better come check it out." She hung up before the dispatcher could ask any questions. Two Mosswood officers, Randall Cooper and Shah Delaney, were parked a few blocks away when the call came in. Cooper, barrel-chested with a buzz cut, had been on the force for 15 years and carried himself like a man with something to prove. Delaney was younger, lean, and still trying to impress him. They hadn't had any real action in days, so the call gave them an excuse to do something. Anything. Within minutes, the cruiser screamed into the station lot, gravel spitting from under the tires, red and blue lights painting the surrounding buildings. Naomi, still on the phone with the Pentagon, looked up sharply. She didn't panic. She did what she was trained to do. Assessed, paused, lowered her phone, and kept her hands visible. The transmission was still live. "Good afternoon, officers," she said calmly. "How can I help you?" Cooper didn't respond. "License and registration," he barked. Naomi took a breath, keeping her tone even. "Absolutely. I'm active duty military, General Naomi Ellsworth. I'm on official assignment. Here are my credentials." She moved slowly, pulling her wallet from her back pocket and producing both her military ID and federal travel orders. Delaney scoffed. "A general?" he muttered. "Right." Cooper snatched the documents, gave them the briefest glance, then tossed them onto the hood of her SUV. "Fake," he muttered. Naomi's eyebrows lifted in disbelief. "Sir, with all due respect—" "Shut it," Delaney snapped. "You trying to play us?" Naomi's instinct screamed that this wasn't going to de-escalate. She kept her voice low and steady. "Please contact your supervisor. You're making a mistake." Cooper stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Naomi didn't move. Not out of defiance, out of sheer disbelief. "You are unlawfully detaining a 4-star general of the United States Army," she said, voice sharper now. "You better think twice." Cooper actually laughed. "Yeah, and I'm the damn president." Delaney lunged, grabbing Naomi's arm roughly. Cooper forced the other behind her back and yanked the cuffs tight, hard enough to sting. Naomi winced, but said nothing. The secure phone slid from the hood of the SUV and hit the concrete with a dull clatter. Still connected, voices from the Pentagon now shouting her name. The officers didn't notice. Or worse, they didn't care. Cooper shoved Naomi against the car, rattling the door. A small crowd had gathered. People whispered, some chuckled, no one stepped forward. Naomi stared ahead at her fractured reflection in the SUV window. At that moment, she wasn't a general. She wasn't even a person to them. She was just a suspicious woman. And that's all it took to bring her to the ground. But 100 miles away in Washington, D.C., alarms had already begun to sound. And when you lay hands on a general without cause, the fallout doesn't take long to arrive. Inside the Pentagon, a tension-heavy silence dropped across the secure operations room like a steel door. The open line from Naomi Ellsworth's secure phone was still active, feeding a garbled but unmistakable stream of chaos into national defense systems, clattering sounds, sharp voices, the unmistakable jingle of handcuffs. An analyst's eyes widened as the audio reached his ears. Within seconds, he pushed the emergency alert button, sending ripples through multiple departments. Within 20 minutes, the Office of Military Oversight had declared a code red involving a high-ranking officer in distress on domestic soil. General Thomas Carter, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was reviewing the audio when he stood up so quickly his chair slammed backward into the wall. "We have an active situation. That's a general on that line. I want her located and accounted for, right now." Commands were issued, locations traced, every available resource mobilized. Meanwhile, in the small and sun-baked Mosswood Police Department, Officers Randall Cooper and Shah Delaney sat back in their metal chairs, filling out sloppy, dismissive reports. "Female suspect detained. Possible impersonation. Gave false military documents," Cooper typed, not even bothering to spell Ellsworth correctly. Delaney snickered as he added, "Subject appeared erratic." Neither mentioned her credentials, the secure phone, or the Pentagon call. They had no idea who they had just arrested. Or worse, they didn't care. Back at the gas station, Paula Sweeney wiped down the counter with a smug satisfaction, feeling like she had prevented some kind of vague threat. She never knew her single phone call had just triggered one of the most intense internal investigations the Department of Defense had launched in years. The following morning, long before the town of Mosswood had even stirred from sleep, 2 black SUVs with federal plates rolled up outside the Mosswood PD. Inside sat Marissa Gates, head of internal affairs for the Department of Defense, known in military and legal circles for her icy efficiency and zero tolerance for procedural failure. Dressed in a sharp grey pantsuit with a lanyard that bore more clearance levels than anyone in Mosswood could imagine, she marched into the police station like she'd built it herself. Chief Hargrove, a portly man in his late 50s who'd barely managed to hang on to his badge after 3 misconduct hearings, looked up from his coffee and nearly choked. "Can I help?" he began. "We're taking over this building," she said flatly. "I need all body cam footage, call logs, and your officers' reports from yesterday. Now. Hargrove stammered. This is about that woman at Kelly's. Marissa's expression didn't flicker. That woman is General Naomi Ellsworth, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Army, and two of your boys put her in cuffs. Cooper, who had just walked in with his coffee, scoffed. She didn't exactly look like a general. Marissa turned slowly. And you don't exactly look like someone who's going to be employed by the end of today. Silence. Delaney tried to speak, but a stern-faced federal marshal stepped between him and the door. You'll remain here until the investigation concludes, he said. That afternoon, both officers were suspended without pay. Word travelled fast. By 5 p.m., CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News were all covering the breaking story. Top U.S. general detained by local cops during Pentagon call. Outrage erupts. Mosswood's quiet anonymity was shattered. Journalists flooded the gas station. Reporters knocked on Paula Sweeney's door. She pulled the blinds down and didn't answer. Some locals cheered her decision. Others began to whisper in fear and shame. What had been a sleepy town no one remembered was about to be defined forever by what happened at a rundown gas station on a humid Tuesday. It started quietly at first. Just a few retweets, a couple of screen captures, and a local news report from a station barely outside of Baton Rouge. But by sunrise the next day, the internet was a wildfire. Someone had leaked body cam footage. The clip began with static and gravel crunching beneath boots. And then, there she was, General Naomi Ellsworth, standing beside her SUV, calm, composed, visibly confused, as two officers barked orders and called her documents fake. The video showed her raising her hands slowly, respectfully. It showed her identify herself, clearly and multiple times. And then it showed the cuffs. The click of steel, the arm wrench, the push against the car. It showed everything. The internet reacted like it had been waiting for this exact match to hit dry kindling. Within hours, the hashtag #JusticeForNaomi was trending in 12 countries. TikToks appeared from veterans in uniform, some saluting, others visibly shaken, speaking directly to camera. This is what serving looks like, and this is how she was treated. Twitter exploded with verified voices, senators, journalists, military brass, and even celebrities. Facebook threads reached millions. A still shot of Naomi's face, calm but insulted, was printed onto protest signs. Veterans showed up outside Mosswood PD wearing their medals. They didn't shout. They just stood in silence, holding signs. She served. You mocked. Paula Sweeney's gas station became a war zone of media trucks. Protesters marched through town square, chanting, "Say her name, Naomi Ellsworth." The mayor of Mosswood made a public statement, nervous behind a podium in front of the courthouse. "We're a proud town," he said. "We believe in justice and fairness. What happened was a misunderstanding." But no one was buying it. The apology was too rehearsed, too late, and too hollow. Naomi still hadn't spoken to the press. The DoD released a brief, cold statement confirming her rank and mission status, and condemned the incident as an unjust and unlawful detention. The footage of the arrest was now on every major network. Anderson Cooper called it a national embarrassment. The View debated it for 10 minutes. Even Fox News, typically skeptical of these incidents, ran the headline, "Top Army General Handcuffed While on Pentagon Call, Mistaken Identity or Disrespect." Back in Washington, D.C., the weight of the moment landed hard. The Joint Chiefs convened an emergency closed-door session. Intelligence analysts updated security protocols for off-base travel. And lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, yes, even Republicans and Democrats, called for immediate hearings into the abuse of federal authority by local law enforcement. The President of the United States, himself a military parent, took to the podium for a brief but powerful address. "What happened to General Ellsworth," he said, "is unacceptable. It is not only an insult to her, but to the entire military family. We stand with her." Mosswood police were overwhelmed. The department issued a statement saying both officers had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But the public didn't want waiting. They wanted action. As the town became a flashpoint for a national reckoning, Naomi remained silent, by choice. She was recovering physically and emotionally at an undisclosed location, surrounded by a small, trusted circle of aides and family. She wore long sleeves to cover the bruises from the cuffs, but the pain ran deeper. This wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. This wasn't the first time her title had been dismissed. But it was the first time it had happened so publicly. Naomi wasn't hiding. She was reflecting, calculating. She read every report, watched every protest, and listened to the stories of strangers who now carried her name like a badge of honor. She saw the hashtags, the tributes, the outrage. But she wasn't ready to speak, yet. Because when she did, it wouldn't just be a press conference. It would be a reckoning, a statement not just of personal resilience, but of systemic failure. She was preparing her voice like a weapon. And when the time came, the world would hear it, loud and clear. The federal investigation that followed was not a quiet one. It was a storm with teeth. Within 48 hours of the incident, the Department of Defense dispatched an elite audit team led by Marissa Gates and backed by the full authority of the Joint Chiefs. This wasn't just about correcting a mistake. It was about dissecting a systemic failure. Subpoenas were issued immediately. The Mosswood Police Department was ordered to turn over every second of body cam footage, every radio log, every line of communication, and every personnel file tied to the arrest of General Naomi Ellsworth. Meanwhile, Pentagon officials declassified portions of the call Naomi had been on during the moment of her detainment. An operation-level strategy briefing involving live asset movements in 3 separate conflict zones. The release of those transcripts confirmed what many feared. Naomi wasn't just on a phone call. She was issuing battlefield orders when Cooper and Delaney cuffed her. As this detail hit major media outlets, the outrage, once fiery, became volcanic. Congressional members demanded immediate hearings. Senators who previously played the wait-and-see game suddenly switched sides. News anchors played the now infamous body cam footage side by side with the Pentagon call audio. Naomi's voice, firm, focused, and calm, could be heard asking for encrypted frequencies, while, in the background, Cooper was yelling, "Don't move!" The contrast was chilling. Officer Cooper was brought in for questioning under oath. When asked if he verified the military identification Naomi provided, he answered with a smirk, "Didn't look real." One senator leaned into the microphone and said, "So you arrested a US general based on how her ID looked to you?" Cooper shrugged. That shrug ended his career. Delaney, visibly more rattled, admitted under pressure that they had instructions to watch for suspicious people. When asked what made Naomi suspicious, he hesitated. She was just standing there, talking weird on her phone. That line became the subject of late-night comedy monologues across the country. Parallel to this, civilian investigators looked into the role of Paula Sweeney, the gas station clerk whose call triggered the arrest. A subpoena for the station's security camera footage revealed Paula's actions from behind the counter. She could be seen staring at Naomi with narrowed eyes, picking up the phone with slow precision, and whispering something just before smiling and hanging up. In a damning moment caught clearly on tape, Paula turned to a co-worker and said, "Got her!" with a grin that could slice glass. That clip was played in Congress, and America watched. As media circled Mosswood, Paula disappeared. resigned under pressure and escorted off the premises by corporate security. Her statement to the press was brief and bitter. "I was just doing what I thought was right." But what had once felt like small-town intuition now looked like implicit bias exposed on a national stage. The congressional hearings were broadcast live. General Ellsworth, finally appearing in uniform, stood before the chamber and delivered a 10-minute statement that silenced the room. "I did not wear my uniform that day," she said, "because I didn't need cloth to validate my service. But some people, apparently, need a costume to recognize worth." The crowd burst into applause. Marissa Gates concluded the investigation with a report titled "Failure to Acknowledge." The findings were brutal: gross misconduct, racial profiling, dereliction of duty, abuse of authority. Cooper and Delaney were stripped of their badges. Chief Hargrove resigned before the vote of no confidence could be held. Paula was fired. Mosswood PD entered federal oversight for the first time in history. But the impact wasn't confined to one station. Presidentially signed legislation followed 2 weeks later. The Civil Uniform Act, requiring all law enforcement departments receiving federal funding to undergo mandatory civilian engagement training, including racial bias testing and federal ID verification standards. Naomi's case had transcended the incident. It had become precedent. Her silence was finally broken. And in breaking it, she helped reshape the system that tried to silence her. 6 months after the arrest that shocked the nation, General Naomi Ellsworth stepped into the Grand Hall of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., the room hushed in anticipation. She wore her full-dress uniform for the first time since the incident, ribbons gleaming, shoulders squared, posture unyielding. Reporters filled every seat. Cameras lined the back wall. Political aides, veterans, students, activists, all gathered not just to witness a speech, but to witness a moment. Naomi approached the podium, adjusted the microphone with clinical precision, and looked into the sea of faces. "I was arrested not for what I did, but for what I looked like," she began, her voice smooth as steel. "I serve a country that trusted me with nuclear codes, but one town couldn't trust me with a phone call." The line struck like a hammer. There were no gasps, just a heavy, solemn silence. In the pause that followed, you could hear hearts pounding. Naomi didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg for sympathy. She laid out facts like evidence. She described every second from that day at Kelly's Fuel and Food, the way her ID was tossed aside, the cuffs that cut into her wrists, the phone still connected to the Pentagon as her rights were crushed beneath boots and badges. "What happened to me," she continued, "was not an isolated error. It was the predictable result of a system that punishes difference and protects assumption." Her speech clocked in at exactly 17 minutes and 42 seconds. It was broadcast live on every major news network, translated in real time by military interpreters, and shared millions of times within the hour. Colleges began requesting transcripts. Activists began quoting her in courtrooms. Lawmakers began to fold her story into proposed legislation. And all the while, Naomi refused to be the center of pity. She was the engine of change now, and she knew it. In the weeks that followed her now historic speech, Naomi didn't retreat to the sidelines. She was appointed by presidential directive to lead a newly formed Civilian Military Accountability Task Force, a bipartisan initiative designed to identify, report and rectify law enforcement abuses, especially those involving active duty personnel and veterans. The first initiative? Federal funding would now be tied to law enforcement departments, meeting strict anti-bias and ID verification training standards. Naomi crisscrossed the country meeting with generals, senators, mayors, and civil rights leaders. She sat in town halls and military academies. She listened. She taught. She challenged. Meanwhile, back in Mosswood, The town that had become the unwilling poster child for injustice began to fade into quiet obscurity again. The gas station changed hands. The police department underwent a complete restructuring. The officers involved had long since lost their badges, and while no criminal charges were brought against them, the civil settlements were substantial. Naomi didn't demand more punishment. She demanded evolution. One news outlet wrote, "She dismantled a system without shouting, suing, or firing a single bullet." In private, Naomi resumed a quieter life. She returned to teaching leadership at West Point. She wrote a book, Calm Authority, which debuted at #1 on multiple bestseller lists. She didn't retell the arrest in graphic detail. Instead, she focused on what she called the architecture of respect. Her message was clear. Dignity is not granted by uniform or title, but it should never be stripped by ignorance. In the final pages of her book, she wrote, "Power is not shown by how loud we speak, but by how still we stand when they try to move us." Those words became the motto of her task force. And though Naomi had no interest in politics, many began whispering about higher office. But she never confirmed or denied. She didn't need to. Mosswood was a moment, but Naomi Ellsworth was a movement. One that began in silence and ended with history. What began as a quiet drive through Louisiana ended in national headlines, public outrage, and a reckoning that reached the halls of Congress. General Naomi Ellsworth didn't just survive injustice, she exposed it, challenged it, and changed it. This story isn't just about one woman. It's about what happens when truth stands its ground. And now, it's your turn. If this story moved you, don't just scroll past. Hit like. If you believe dignity has no uniform, drop a comment to honor those who serve and are still forced to fight for basic respect. Share this video to keep the conversation alive. And make sure you subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that the world needs to hear, because sometimes it only takes one voice to change everything.